My name is Amara, and I need to tell you about something that happened to me when I was 19 years old. Before I share the whole story, I want you to know that what I'm about to tell you is true, and even though it was painful, it led me to discover the most beautiful truth I've ever known. Sometimes the darkest moments in our lives become the doorway to the greatest light. I lived in a medium-sized city called Ochi Edo State in southern Nigeria with my parents and 3 younger brothers. Our house was a simple bungalow with a zinc roof that made loud noises when it rained, and we had a small compound where my mother grew vegetables and kept chickens. Life was ordinary but peaceful, and I thought I knew exactly how my future would unfold. Every Friday, my family and I would walk together to the large mosque on Ibrahim Babangida Way where hundreds of people gathered for prayers. I loved the sense of community there, the way everyone dressed in their finest clothes, and how the Imam would teach us about living righteously. I was a dedicated student of our faith, always eager to learn more, and I even helped teach younger girls on Saturday afternoons in the mosque's education center. My parents were proud of me, especially my father who worked as a tailor in the main market, because I was respectful and serious about my religious duties. I had dreams of becoming a teacher one day, and I studied hard at the Polytechnic where I was taking courses in education. Everything changed on a hot afternoon in August 2018 during the preparation for Eid celebrations. I had volunteered to help organize the women's section of the mosque for the upcoming festival, arranging prayer mats and decorating the walls with beautiful calligraphy. The Imam, a respected man named Al-Haji Musa who everyone in our community trusted and honored, asked me to help him carry some boxes of Quran texts from the storage building to his office. I followed him without any hesitation because he was like a grandfather figure to all of us young people. But when we reached his private office and he closed the door behind us, something in the atmosphere shifted in a way that made my stomach feel tight with fear, and what happened in the next 30 minutes would haunt my dreams for many months to come. What happened next in that small office filled with religious books and prayer beads left me feeling like something precious inside me had been shattered into a million pieces. He hurt me in ways that made no sense, ways that felt completely wrong but that he kept saying were permissible and right. I remember staring at a framed verse on the wall while tears ran down my cheeks, wondering why the words about mercy and compassion seemed so far away from what was actually happening in that moment. When he finally unlocked the door and let me leave, he straightened his cap and told me calmly that this was our secret, that I had been blessed with special attention, and that I should thank Allah for this experience. I stumbled out of the mosque compound in a daze, my clothes disheveled and my hijab crooked, barely aware of the people greeting me as I passed because my mind felt like it was floating somewhere outside my body. I walked home through the busy streets of Benin City, past the market where women were selling tomatoes and peppers, past the mechanic shops where men were working on cars, past the primary school where children were playing football in the dusty field. Everything looked the same as it had that morning, but I felt like I was moving through a completely different world. When I reached our compound and my little brother Yusuf ran up to greet me excitedly because he had scored well on his mathematics test, I could barely manage a smile. My mother took one look at my face and asked what was wrong, whether I was feeling sick from the heat. I told her I just had a headache and went straight to the room I shared with my brothers, curling up on my thin mattress and staring at the ceiling while the ceiling fan creaked slowly above me. That night, I could not eat the jollof rice my mother had prepared, and every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that office, feeling trapped and helpless all over again. For 2 weeks, I carried this terrible secret inside me like a heavy stone pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe normally or think clearly about anything else. I stopped going to the mosque, telling my parents I was not feeling well, that I had stomach problems that made it difficult to sit through long prayers. My father looked concerned and asked if we should take me to the clinic, but I insisted it was just stress from my studies at the Polytechnic. Every night, I would lie awake listening to my brothers sleeping peacefully beside me, wondering why this had happened to me and what I had done to deserve such treatment. I kept replaying everything in my mind, searching for something I might have said or done that could have caused Al-Haji Musa to act that way, wondering if perhaps I had been careless with my dress or my behavior in some way I did not understand. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. We'd be honored to have you join this growing community of seekers and truth lovers. The silence became unbearable when my mother started asking more serious questions about why I refused to attend Friday prayers and why I flinched whenever anyone mentioned the mosque or Al-Haji Musa's name. One evening while she was cooking beans in our small kitchen and I was sitting quietly on a wooden stool nearby, she turned to me with worry written all over her face and asked directly what was troubling me. The words came pouring out before I could stop them, tumbling over each other as I told her everything about that afternoon in the Imam's office, about how he had hurt me and threatened me, about how I felt dirty and broken inside. I watched my mother's face change from concern to shock to something else, something that looked almost like anger but not the kind of anger I expected. She dropped the cooking spoon and it clattered loudly on the concrete floor, and for a moment the only sound was the bubbling of the beans on the stove. What happened next broke something deeper inside me than what Al-Haji Musa had done. My mother's face hardened and she asked me in a cold voice how I could make up such wicked lies about a holy man who had dedicated his life to serving Allah. She demanded to know what I was wearing that day, how I had been acting, whether I had been flirting or sending signals that could have confused him. When I started crying and insisting that I had done nothing wrong, she slapped me across the face and told me that I was bringing shame to our family with these false accusations. She said that young girls these days had no respect for elders and were always trying to get attention by making up stories, and that if I continued with this lie, I would destroy not only the Imam's reputation but our entire family's standing in the community. My father came home from the market later that evening, and I heard my parents having a heated discussion in low voices in their bedroom. And then my father called me in and told me with deep disappointment in his eyes that I was forbidden from leaving the house except for school until I learned to control my imagination and stop spreading fitna. They took away my phone and told my brothers to watch me carefully whenever I went anywhere, treating me like I was the criminal instead of the victim. For 3 weeks, I was essentially a prisoner in my own home, allowed to attend my classes at the Polytechnic but required to come straight back without talking to anyone. During this time, something strange began happening inside my heart and mind. I found myself questioning things I had never questioned before, wondering about beliefs I had accepted my whole life without examination. When I tried to pray in the direction of Mecca as I had done thousands of times before, the words felt empty and meaningless, like I was speaking into a void that had no one listening on the other side. I kept asking myself where Allah had been when I needed protection, why he had allowed a man who claimed to serve him to hurt an innocent girl, why my parents who loved Allah could not see the truth of what had happened. Late at night when my brothers were sleeping, I would lie awake thinking about all the teachings I had memorized over the years, verses about women needing to be modest and obedient, stories about how women should submit to male authority without question. Things that had never bothered me before now felt like chains wrapping around my heart. I remembered how the Imam used to teach that women were worth half the value of men in certain legal matters, how our testimony was considered less reliable, how we needed male permission for so many aspects of life. A terrible thought kept creeping into my mind no matter how hard I tried to push it away, the thought that perhaps the system itself was designed to protect men like Al-Haji Musa and silence girls like me. I felt guilty for even thinking such things because I had been taught that questioning our faith was dangerous and wrong, but I could not stop the questions from coming. My younger brother Ibrahim, who was only 10 years old at the time, noticed that something was deeply wrong even though our parents had tried to keep the situation quiet. One afternoon when we were alone in the compound and he was supposed to be watching me, he sat down beside me on the concrete step and asked why I always looked so sad. I tried to smile and tell him everything was fine, but he shook his head and said he had heard me crying at night and wanted to help. His innocent concern made my eyes fill with tears, and I found myself telling him a simplified version of what had happened, explaining that someone I trusted had hurt me and that I was struggling to understand why. Ibrahim listened carefully with his young face serious and thoughtful, and then he said something that surprised me. He told me that his friend Chinidu at school, who was a Christian, had said that Jesus loved everyone, especially people who were hurting, and that Jesus always protected the weak and stood up for those who could not defend themselves. I had never paid much attention to Christianity before, considering it a foreign religion that had nothing to do with me, but something about what my little brother said planted a tiny seed of curiosity in my heart. 2 months passed in this miserable state where I went through the motions of daily life while feeling dead inside, and then something unexpected happened that would change the direction of my entire existence. My Aunt Rama, my father's younger sister who lived in Lagos and worked as a nurse, came to visit our family for a few days. She was different from most of our relatives because she had traveled widely and seemed to see the world through different eyes. On her second day visiting, she found me sitting alone in the compound staring at nothing while chickens pecked around my feet, and she sat down beside me on the wooden bench without saying anything at first. After a long silence, she asked me gently what was troubling me, and something about the kindness in her voice made me want to tell her everything even though I knew I was supposed to keep quiet. I looked around to make sure no one else was nearby, and then I poured out the whole story to Aunt Rama, about Al-Haji Musa and what he had done, about my parents not believing me, about feeling trapped and hopeless and confused about everything I had once believed. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she did not look shocked or angry or disbelieving. Instead, she reached over and took my hand in hers and told me that she believed me completely, that what had happened was not my fault in any way, and that I was brave for surviving such a terrible experience. Those simple words of belief and validation made me cry harder than I had cried since the whole ordeal began, because finally someone was acknowledging that I was telling the truth. Aunt Rama held me while I sobbed, and when I calmed down, she told me quietly that she had a friend named Miriam who helped young women who had been through traumatic experiences, and that she wanted to give me Miriam's phone number in case I ever needed someone to talk to. She wrote the number on a small piece of paper and tucked it into my hand, warning me to keep it hidden and safe. For the next week, I carried that paper with me everywhere, sometimes taking it out just to look at the numbers written in blue ink, wondering if I would have the courage to actually call. Finally, one afternoon when my parents had gone to visit relatives and my brothers were playing football in the street, I borrowed my brother Ibrahim's phone and went to hide in the bathroom. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the numbers correctly. A warm, friendly voice answered after 3 rings, and when I asked nervously if this was Miriam, she confirmed it was and asked how she could help me. I started explaining who I was and that Aunt Rama had given me her number, and before I could say more, I began crying uncontrollably. Miriam did not rush me or act impatient. She simply waited quietly on the other end of the line, occasionally saying gentle words of encouragement until I could speak again. When I finally managed to tell Miriam everything that had happened, she listened with such compassion and understanding that I felt like someone had turned on a light in a room that had been dark for months. She told me clearly and firmly that what Al-Haji Musa had done was wrong, that it was not my fault, that I had done nothing to deserve such treatment, and that the adults who refused to believe me were failing in their duty to protect me. Her words were like medicine to my wounded soul because she was speaking truth that contradicted all the lies and blame I had been carrying. Miriam explained that she worked with an organization that helped young women who had experienced trauma and abuse, and she asked if I would be willing to talk with her regularly on the phone since meeting in person would be difficult given my circumstances. I agreed immediately because talking to her felt like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a suffocating room for too long. Over the next several weeks, Miriam would call me whenever I could find a private moment to talk, usually when I pretended to go buy something from the nearby shop or when my family was occupied with other things. During these conversations, she began telling me about Jesus Christ, someone I had heard about before but only as a prophet in Islamic teachings. Miriam explained that Jesus was different from other religious leaders because he specifically sought out people who were hurting, broken, rejected, and outcast from society. She told me stories about how Jesus treated women with dignity and respect during a time when women were considered property, how he defended a woman who had been caught in wrongdoing when religious leaders wanted to stone her, how he allowed women to be his followers and learn from him when this was considered inappropriate. Each story she shared made me more curious because this Jesus seemed to care about justice and protection for the vulnerable in ways I had not encountered before. Miriam managed to arrange for a small book to be delivered to me secretly through my Aunt Rama, a book that contained the teachings and stories of Jesus. I hid this book inside my school bag and would read it late at night by the dim light of a small torch while my brothers slept. One story particularly captured my attention, about a woman from Samaria who had been rejected and hurt by society, and when she met Jesus at a well, he did not condemn her or shame her but instead offered her living water and told her about God's love. I read that story over and over, feeling like this woman's experience mirrored my own, feeling like maybe Jesus could see my pain and shame the way he had seen hers. The more I read about Jesus, the more I noticed how different his approach was from what I had experienced in my own religious community. He welcomed children and said they were important. He healed people who were sick and suffering. He stood up to religious leaders who used their power to hurt others instead of help them, and he taught that God's love was available to everyone regardless of their status or background. One night in November 2018, about 4 months after the incident with Al-Haji Musa, I had a dream so vivid and real that even now I can remember every detail as if it happened yesterday. In the dream, I was walking alone on a long dusty road during a terrible storm with thunder crashing overhead and lightning flashing across dark clouds. I was cold and wet and exhausted, carrying a heavy load on my back that I could not put down no matter how hard I tried. The road seemed endless and I felt completely lost, not knowing which direction to go or whether anyone would help me if I called out. Suddenly, I saw a figure walking toward me through the rain, and as he came closer, I could see he was wearing simple white clothing that somehow stayed clean despite the storm, and his face radiated a warmth and kindness that made me feel safe even before he spoke. He stopped in front of me and looked at me with eyes full of compassion and understanding, eyes that seemed to see straight into my soul and know every pain and fear I had been carrying. He told me that he had been watching over me during my darkest moments, that he had seen every tear I cried and felt every hurt I experienced, and that he had never abandoned me even when I felt completely alone. He reached out and touched the heavy load on my back, and instantly it disappeared as if it had never existed, leaving me feeling lighter than I had felt in months. Then he told me that he wanted to give me something better than what I had been carrying, something called peace that the world could not give or take away. He explained that he had come to heal broken hearts and set captives free, and that if I chose to follow him, he would never leave me or forsake me no matter what happened. I asked him who he was even though something deep inside me already knew the answer. He revealed to me that he was Jesus, the one who had died and risen again so that I could have new life and hope. He told me that he loved me with an everlasting love, that I was precious and valuable in his eyes, and that he had a beautiful purpose for my life that included using my pain to help others find healing. When I woke up from that dream, my face was wet with tears, but they were different tears than I had cried before, tears of relief and hope rather than despair and shame. Something fundamental had shifted inside me during that dream, and I knew with absolute certainty that Jesus was real, that he cared about me personally, and that I wanted to follow him no matter what the cost. The next time Miriam called me, I told her about the dream, and she explained that Jesus was calling me to become his follower, to give my life to him and trust him to guide my future.